Hello everybody and welcome to this latest video discussion as part of the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight and I've been with RICS for over 11 years now. I sit within the regulatory standards and thought leadership part of the organisation, and my role is to look at the effect of data and technology on the built and natural environment. With over 130,000 members working worldwide, right across the property life cycle, all the way from land acquisition, planning, development, construction, operations, property management, brokerage, valuation. It's a very, very wide canvas upon which data and technology is having an effect right across the different asset types through land, rural, residential, mixed use, commercial, infrastructure, alternative assets. So once again, an incredibly powerful landscape upon which data and tech is having profound and very positive effects. And today I'm really glad to have Zac Goodman join me from Switched On Space. So Zac, please do join me.
Hi Andrew, how you doing?
Very well, very well. Great to have you on the call today. Now, I always kind of start off these conversations before we delve into kind of the data and technology with a bit of the human side. So it's always great to hear a bit about your backstory, the kind of formation of the firm, Switched On Space, and I know it's linked to TSP. So it'd be great to have a bit of a background on your kind of backstory, indeed the origin story of Switched On Space.
Sure. So many a moon ago, I actually started in banking and finance. Very fast-paced environment, very data-led environment, and I worked on the market side of that. And about 5 years into that career, I made the decision I wanted to move into real estate. And at the tender age of 25, I think it was 25, 26 years old, formed TSP. And TSP, for all intents and purposes, was a property management business. Fast forward 13 years, we have expanded into investment, property management advisory. We own our own portfolio of assets in central London. And about 2 years ago, we started Switched On Space out of TSP.
Right.
And that was predominantly, we saw there was a need to have an expert in the market that could wear the hat of being a property landlord, of being a property manager, and could really understand the true benefits and applications of prop tech to UK real estate.
So, I mean, what makes a smart space? I mean, it's obviously, you know, the fundamental kind of driver behind what you're trying to do, and the kind of various services you provide. What makes a smart space? And I guess post pandemic, what's changed about people's ideas about smart space?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Smart space. A lot of people use that word smart. I think for me, it's really simple. I kind of strip it back a bit further than that. I don't know what makes a smart space, but I know when a space is behaving smartly. And I think for us, when a space is behaving smartly, it's wasting less, it's more valuable, it's more reactive to the user's needs, and it's giving off a predictable flow of information to whoever owns or manages or uses that asset so that they can use that in a better way moving forwards. And I say this not to be pedantic or facetious, but there are so many spaces that you can go to in the world right now, which some people would define as incredibly smart with all the bells and whistles. Yeah, I go in them and no one's actually using a lot of the technology there. So the smartest spaces are the ones that actually end up being used and people benefit from the most. I think that comes back to, you know, efficiency overall. Are we saving human time and at the same time improving the experience for those that are using spaces? And that's the gap that prop tech promises to fill.
So I suppose from what you've said, Zac, it sounds like there's a mixture there of kind of almost low-tech interventions as well as the high-tech stuff. So I mean, what's the kind of range of things that, depending on what, you know, a space needs to be productive, that you can supply and that people are finding useful? Because it does sound like there's a real range there of quite simple things to the more complex things.
Well, look, there's the simplest piece of prop tech that is worldwide and in nearly every commercial building in the world is the good old PIR sensor, right? And we've had those for 30, 40 years. very underrepresented, very underloved. But a motion sensor in a floor switches the power off, right? And if we consider the impact of someone not switching the lights off before they go home at the end of the day, and then not being a sensor there that would therefore switch the lights off, the cost of that is enormous. But flashing forwards, the type of technologies that we're really interested in, I think there's a few solves that people in property really need. And I think the primary one at the moment is how many people are in a building at any given time, and when and why, and are there any patterns to that? And I think that's what, you know, we would look at as the kind of the single source of truth from where to act beyond. We're also looking at air quality in spaces, of course. We're looking at better, more easy to manage remote smart systems such as access control, and allowing people to use and access and securely give credentials in a way that they want to, whether that be their Apple Watch, whether it be their mobile phone, whether it be an RFID sticker tag and what have you. And how do those systems really work? How do they scale? How can they be managed securely? And then there's the micro sensors, the little useful sensors that might detect a leak, that might detect temperature, that might detect a bad current in a building. And then that leads you on to the question of, can you get all of these things working in Congress? And is there an artificial intelligence or a way of managing these things algorithmically where one reads a piece of data and the other one acts? So there's the sensors, the readers, and then there's the control piece. And I'm not quite sure if anybody's got all of that to work perfectly in Congress. But I think the thing at this stage in the cycle that we're most interested in is the insight. Because from having the prop tech in place, we can then use humans to read insight and make those little interventions, those small interventions here and there, which have a really quite magnified effect on different goals that we might have for our various properties in our portfolio.
Now, it's become a bit of a cliche to talk about the kind of pandemic accelerating the pace of change, but it clearly has, I think, in terms of people thinking about how they use space, and dare I say it, how they want to encourage people back into spaces with this kind of debate now about working from home and getting people to come back to the office. What have you seen, and what's the insight you've had from working with your obviously with your clients around how their thinking has changed and evolved, and how radical do you think the changes are in the way people are perhaps looking at office space now?
I don't think it's so radical. You know, what we now call work from home, hybrid, remote working, and all the rest of it. I mean, I seem to remember before the pandemic, people just calling that agile working. And I mean, in our own offices, we had non-designated desks, lockers, collab spaces that people could come into well before the pandemic. And I've been into many environments that exhibited just that. I think flexible working and home working has been going on for a long time. I think that the thing that's changed more radically is the numbers of people that now say that they want it, and the numbers of employers that are now trying to factor this in to their work policies. So I don't see anything completely and utterly, you know, upside down from what we saw before. We've seen an acceleration which has been enabled by a huge experiment which occurred because of COVID and the pandemic. And I think probably one of the things that's more interesting is the way in which we're all trying to digest and process the data off the back of that. How does this impact productivity? How does this impact culture? How does this impact recruitment? How does this impact the bottom line and businesses' competitiveness? And I think there's a huge ongoing debate, and I think it spans from young to old, and I think it spans across different silos and departments and job functions within businesses. And there's lots of different comparators across the space. And I think this is something that is going to take quite a few years to unpick. But the trends that we see as a result are well known. We have many businesses that have really sought to re-examine the commercial space, which they either own or they lease. And the biggest question they'll always ask themselves first, which they should have as a business, is, are we paying too much? Could we make a saving here? And so that's an interesting exercise. What's really tricky for them is they don't have any data to really be able to understand the productivity of their space, because they don't have the prop tech in place often. So we've had many clients that have come to us and said, well, we actually, we need that single source of truth. We know we're kind of letting people work 3-4 days a week, but we're not really sure how to map this and track the crossover and understand when is the office usage peaking and when is it bottoming out, and what's the minimum viable space that we can have. Because it's the classic, if you have a 50-person organization that wants to allow people to work flexibly, at some point, as you go down square feet of space, there will be a minimum amount of space that they need to be able to accommodate. Say it's a Thursday that they bring a lot of people in. Well, is that 25 people? Is that 35 people? And of those 25 or 35 people, how many sit at a desk? What percentage of the time is the meeting room used? Is the bathroom ratio right? So that's the first one, how many? And then people have obviously inquired with us about air quality sensors. And again, we found at first a lot of people were paying lip service. So put a couple of air quality sensors in and then tell all your employees, but what are you actually doing with that data? And is someone there looking at the insight of, okay, when the office is full, the air quality goes down, as you might expect. And when the office is empty, the air quality goes up. And, then trying to cure and solve the problems that come from that. And I think, again, I won't say radical, I'll say people are looking at down many different pathways. We see 4 kind of areas. I think the first one for us that interests us the most, because as a wider group, we're a B Corp, and sustainability is pretty much the key decision vector for us, and that we believe most businesses will end up having to adapt to over the next 20 years. So sustainability is a big piece, because we can look at what we consume and what we waste in terms of energy consumption, and adding data into that makes that a lot easier. In easier chronology, when you're driving your car and it tells you how many miles per gallon you are consuming, that is the effect that property technology can have in the real world. I think after sustainability, there's what we call capability, which is actually, and we saw this for a long time before the pandemic, but that is that a lot of the clients we work with, a lot of the tenants we see coming into our portfolios across our group, have significant data infrastructure, security needs. It used to be 10 years ago, people would come in, they'd serve themselves, they'd call up BT, they'd get a ADSL line in or what have you. Now we have many more businesses that are utterly and completely dependent on being able to have 2 GB dedicated lines. And so, a more chunkier piece of the prop tech that we've been working on extensively is getting fiber backbones installed into buildings and what have you, which give people more choice, quicker access to various ISPs, easier ability to upgrade, more kind of robustness in not having Wi-Fi outages and what have you. So that's a big piece, sort of capability, if you like. And I think after that comes experience, which is, how can we improve the experience for those occupying spaces? And I think perhaps the one where we're seeing the most need is actually a really simple one, which is desk and meeting room booking systems, and ones that can react in a live and dynamic way, right? Because it's that day of the week when everybody comes in, and it's a bun fight to get yourself a desk, to get it near the person that you might be working with. All the meeting rooms, even though they might have been empty on Monday and Tuesday, are now flat out. And then what happens with the sort of what we call the bed blockers, people who book out a meeting room and then no one turns up. So you want these meeting rooms to be smart to the degree that they sense no one's in there, and when there should be someone there, and after 10 minutes it frees themselves up, and so on and so forth. So that's what we would call user experience. And there's a lot of other property technologies that can go in to improve, from concierge services at the reception desks to partner apps for building, which give tenants access to local amenities and services and what have you. And then the fourth column, which is probably more landlord specific, but it does apply to a lot of people that occupy on a broader basis, is value, is understanding the value of space to someone else. And by having things like occupancy data, by having things of that usage data and what have you, that can start to give us a different dimension as to how valuable space is and when that space is valuable, right? And I think as we move into the future, as everything has started to do across the piece, we start to fragment things and share them and use them more. We've seen it with taxis through Uber. We've seen it in the residential space through places like Airbnb. And I wonder, and I've no idea, but in the future, if there'll be a time where, you know, there'll be certain companies that use their space for 3-4 days a week and actually find that they have additional resource that they're paying for, which is completely empty, and can they convert that to value and what have you. Likewise, for landlords, they can start to understand how well their buildings are being used, how much their tenants are using it, and therefore this could start impacting lease decisions and purchasing decisions into the future. So I think, as you alluded to into the introduction, it is a really, really big space, and different people are coming at it with different goals. And so we like to try and assess with our clients, out of the 4 sort of pillars there that we discussed, which one is it that is the priority.
And what about the challenge of because you've talked about a lot of kind of value pieces there that accrue to different stakeholders to some extent, but what about trying to measure not the kind of objective air quality, temperature, noise, etc., but how are you trying to capture that slightly more intangible and harder to measure kind of user experience in terms of how happy people are in a particular space? And that obviously can be linked to productivity, but what kind of things are you and your clients doing to try and assess that sort of user experience, that kind of feedback from the occupiers to say, yeah, this is I love coming to this building, I feel productive, I can collaborate, and those things they must be measurable in some ways, but they're much more challenging in some respects than simply getting a sensor to tell you the parts per million of CO2 or something like that.
Well, I think that's where some things don't change in real estate, and that's about talking to people and knowing your customer. And I think for us, it's about having technology that brings you closer to the customer. And rather than looking at sensors telling you how people are enjoying a space and what have you, I think what data will tell you is it will certainly give you a steer as to what questions to ask. Let me give you an example. If you had some data feeding in from an office floor, 100 desks, and you could notice that in one corner, that however busy or empty that space got, that corner was never used, right? That would lead you to want to know why, right? And you'd go in there and someone would say, well, actually, it's right beneath an air conditioning duct, so it's always freezing cold. Or this space is right next to the kitchen, the soundproofing's not very good, and there's a clattering, or it's near to the toilets and what have you. So, I mean, there are obviously automated feedback buttons. Are you happy? You know, like you see at the airport when you're passing through customs. Yeah. You can send those annoying emails to people, surveying them and what have you. But I think that's where, if you've got data doing a lot of the legwork for you, the prop tech doing the legwork for you, picking up data, then that should afford someone in your organization time to get down and actually start talking to people and saying, hey, what matters to you? And in the process of trying out prop tech, we learned things. So we were running a building app, a mobile app, in about 10 buildings last year. And this app could do a lot of stuff. It had messaging capability, which could, you know, directly link people without having to use email to property managers, facilities managers. It had a message board for all tenants within the buildings. It had ways that you could click and access local businesses and discounts. But interestingly, when we went and spoke to people that were using it, and we could see usage wasn't that great, adoption wasn't great. And one of the things that we learned was that actually what people said to us was, you know, the biggest problem we're having at the moment, which we'd love to have as part of this app, is desk booking. And so we went to the app developer and we said, look, how do you feel about this? And they were like, well, actually, it's interesting because we're working across Europe and what have you, and desk booking was the biggie. And so we helped them to try and develop that out, and we saw usership go up on these things. But again, it's all weights and balances, because actually and this is where you kind of put your TSP hat back on. I think in many of the buildings where we've been, if we'd asked them, would they rather have desk booking in this mobile app, or would you rather that we upgraded the end of journey facilities in the basements, which are not technical things and what have you, they would go for that. And so getting feedback still relies on knowing your product, knowing your customer, knowing your resource constraints, and trying to thread the perfect path through that.
And I suppose it's a reminder that real estate is fundamentally a people servicing business and a people business, and you still need to walk your buildings. You still need property managers to be there and actually be sharing the experience and talking to the people who are using it. So
more now than ever. I mean, if there's been one radical change in my view, certainly in the office space, is that tenants, or we call them customers, have become so much more discerning and demanding and challenging. And actually, a lot of people in the space find that really hard to deal with, because it's no longer let and forget. We find it exciting because when you have discerning and challenging and demanding customers, what tends to happen across the board is that the water level of quality increases. And that's what we're seeing now with occupants of buildings. They are dragging up the quality of provision of office spaces. Gone are the days of the blue nylon carpets and the awful desks and the wonky chairs and what have you. You know, everything is ergonomic. It's well designed. We're seeing a huge influx of biophilia come into spaces. We're seeing sustainable materials being used for furnishings and soundproofings. We're seeing more enabled meeting rooms than we've ever seen before. Outdoor spaces, wellness spaces, end of journey amenities, and what have you. We're seeing what I can only describe as akin to what happened when the old 3-star hotels kind of went out of vogue, and either you were affordable, clean, you know, at the bottom end of the pricing dynamic, or you were kind of like very high quality, and it was either boutique or it was, you know, 5-star hotel type of quality. The middle market of offices has evaporated. You're either clean, basic, affordable, or you are high tech, capable, sustainable, professional. There is no middle ground anymore. That's the radical change, really.
Yeah, as you say, almost a polarization of two very distinct kind of offerings, both equally valuable, but very distinct in terms of what they offer and obviously the price point. So, I mean, given that you're working across, you know, a number of cities across different countries and different continents, are there both consistent things you're seeing and working with clients in, or differences? You know, are there any particular stories that highlight some of the things you've done in perhaps the last year or so?
Yeah, I mean, look, the biggest difference we've noticed is, so we've done a few global rollouts over the last year. And I think the biggest difference that we saw initially was the speed at which people went back to offices across Asia, across Europe, and across the Americas. There are differences in how people use their spaces in different cultures and different parts of the world. America's really interesting because depending on which seaboard you're on, one side sort of favors a lot more, I hate using this word because I can't really say it, but cellularization, boxing people off, and then you can go to another place and it's completely and utterly open plan. And then also, you know, in terms of, there's been real sort of regional differences in the type of people that have been allowed to work from home. So in some parts of the world, it's the really senior people that have worked from home and the juniors have come in, and then you see it vice versa. But I think that in a globalized world with social media and everything else like that, I think in general, young people have the same idea of what they want from a workplace. You know, this modern, and we do focus primarily more on the more future-facing new economy businesses, because they are the ones in the battle to try and attract talent. And so they're coming to people like us to sort of say, well, look, what technology is available to help us make this work better for us? Because that's what it's all about. It's about being competitive to get the best talent.
And if I understand it correctly, you've taken kind of the approach of working with kind of best of breed partners for the various bits of property technology. Tell us how that's working and the kind of best of breed products that are, going out the door most quickly, to use the vernacular, that people find most useful.
What we're trying to do is, the property tech world has exploded in the past 2, 3, 4 years. And one of the reasons for that is because you can track it back to venture capital investment sort of 5, 6, 7 years ago. So if you like, that was at the genesis and the feeding of the conveyor belt, if you like. And now what we're seeing is a lot of products that are starting to come off the conveyor belt, and they've been through R&D and development and fundraising, and they have, in some cases a minimum viable product, and in some cases quite a good product that's matured and ready to go. But there's going to be a lot of winners and losers, and there's going to be a lot of consolidation and what have you. And what we're fearful of is in investing in something too early that never sees its way through. So we have a set of criteria internally, and we're not just looking for the best in breed, if you like. We're looking for, is this product matured? Is our partner, the product manufacturer, if you like, have they got a good roadmap? Are they well funded? Is this going to be around in a few years, and is it going to be supported? Because some of this stuff is not cheap, right? And then we're looking for other things as well. We're looking for that kind of Apple effect, like what is the nexus between software and hardware like? And that's been something that's really interesting at the moment, because property tech is nascent. What you're finding is that most people are buying what you would call the solution, which is the hardware and the software combined. And the product manufacturer is doing both sides of that. Now, what we see in most other technology places eventually is that people give up doing that, and you get standards where you can choose what software overlay you're going to use on your hardware and what have you. We've seen it in mobile phones, we've seen it in car AV systems and what have you. And so that's a tricky one as well, because you can have the most incredible sensor that's super accurate, but if you haven't got a decent user interface and decent software, and it's not going to be compatible with standards in the future, that also creates a problem. And then there's lots of other different things to consider as well, wired versus battery, and some of this stuff will be very familiar to people, because what's interesting is commercial is doing this after the domestic setting, right? So you might have got some smart smoke detectors at home, and you had to make the decision about whether you were going to wire it in or whether you were going to change the batteries every 2, 3 years. Retrofit versus rebuild, centralized BMS system versus modular system, and different systems that can work independently of one another. So we're looking at a raft of different factors like behind property technology, and we hope that means that by the time we've selected partners, we're selecting partners that we think genuinely have a brilliant product, that have the opportunity to become market leader and are going to be around for a significant period of time. And then what we really invest ourselves doing at the moment is building strong relationships with those partners so that we can get better pricing, better timelines, but also that we can feed back our clients' needs into their product roadmaps. And they're really interested in hearing that. A lot of the partners that we're with aren't based in the UK. And so, whether they're in America or they're in Asia, there's different demands, and they are really trying to work and pick which way they develop their product. So if we can get in early and we can support them and bring them clientele, then I think it's a virtuous cycle in terms of what ends up happening with the evolution of that product.
Indeed. A slightly sort of, to change the tack slightly, it's always interesting because, as you mentioned, I mean, the prop tech world has exploded over these last few years, and clearly there are, thousands of firms in the space now, and obviously our other tech partners in very much a similar position. But how are you going about that kind of brand awareness raising issue when it's arguably a kind of very kind of busy, noisy marketplace? What's your roadmap to get to the market?
For us, it's about partnering with the right products. And if you end up being with the right products, you will build brand awareness for quality, for knowledge, for competency, and for experience. So we are not out there screaming out, come buy prop tech and all the rest of it. We're very fortunate in the sense that Switched On Space is nestled within our wider group. We're a very broad-based group of companies. We've been around for a long time. We're not venture funded. So we are taking it slow. We're in a new market with new products, with new actors. We've had a big event that has affected real estate in a profoundly fundamental way over the last couple of years. And so we're quietly getting about our business. I mean, you know, the greatest thing about property technology is the total addressable market, because it's the biggest total addressable market in the world. It's $250 trillion. So we expect to see the marketplace get more and more congested. We expect to see more and more actors there. And what we've learned in every part of our business, whether it's investing and adding value to real estate, whether it's working on third-party client mandates, managing portfolios, experience, a measured approach, thoughtful intervention, and, you know, taking one's time is invaluable. And we're not product manufacturers. Now, if we were product manufacturers, our business plan would be very different. It'd be like, get to the minimum viable product, shout as loud as you possibly can, and throw yourself out there. So no, we are very busy learning more and more about our product partners and trying to find more and more product partners. And what's interesting is, even though we're not shouting, people are starting to find us, because the product partners look at each other and they look at who their channel partners are throughout the world, and they'll be like, okay, and they come to us, and that's a really nice thing as well, when we get recognized for having built a great relationship. And, you know, for us, one of our proudest relationships was one of our first ones, which is Density, which is a phenomenal piece of technology, and where they're going with that and what they're doing doesn't take me to sell it, if you like. It's an absolutely fantastic piece of kit. We've also got really interested in crossover stuff. So we've formed a partnership with Room.com, who are creating smart pieces of furniture, smart meeting rooms, smart phone booths. And the impact that that could have on spaces, not just through sustainability and value and user experience. I mean, it crosses over all four of those kind of those areas that interest us. But what's really interesting is we see so many products which we think are unbelievable, but they don't take in the market. People, mainly because they're often priority number 3 or number 4 for people, and people are very busy with priority number 1 and priority number 2. And, you know, there's also something that I think rewards us for being quite steady in our approach into breaking into the market, and that is that the UK market versus the rest of the world is actually being very, very slow on the take of property technology. I've been surprised over the last couple of years. I thought, you know, 2 years out from the pandemic, we would see a lot more adoption of property technology into buildings, and it hasn't quite gone that way so far.
So, I mean, on that final note, what would be your prediction, maybe just thinking about the UK market in terms of real estate? Do you think it will start catching up? Do you think that there will be a bit more of an awakening of that? And because, as you say, there's always a danger in assuming that the UK is leading in any way, to be honest, in this kind of sector.
Yeah, I mean, I think quality of office spaces and stuff, I think the UK has been a leader for quite a significant period of time, especially when compared with America, which you would naturally assume would be the leader. But it's been a surprise not to see property technology move faster and more further. I think we're going to see adoption radically accelerate over the next year, 2 years, 3 years. And there's 2 real drivers for me, and it comes back to sustainability, and that is the first off, the structurally higher cost of energy is now going to force people to try and be more efficient with consumption. Okay, suddenly switching off those boilers or using less electricity, there's a real financial incentive for people to invest in technology to assist in reducing those costs. But secondly is the race to carbon net zero, because every year we get closer to 2050. Every year we get closer to 2030, and the government sets some new minimum standards. You are not going to get this country, certainly on the commercial property side, to get anywhere near where the government wants us to get without significant use of technology in driving down consumption and measuring things that we have previously simply not measured. And you're starting to see it. I mean, you've only to take a cursory glance of LinkedIn and see how many people have suddenly become an ESG officer at a real estate company, right? I mean, the real piece of data that I'd like to see is how many ESG officers were there in 2018 versus 2022, because that is going to be one of those parabolic curves that you'll see. And I get a real sense of it from speaking to peers and contemporaries in the industry that, okay, this environment thing is real. This isn't something we can stick a nice label on and pay for a certificate and what have you. We have to build, we have to renovate, we have to refurbish in a profoundly more sustainable way. And that's actually as much of a maths and physics challenge as it is just a pure resourcing challenge. And those inputs, that data, we're going to have to be picking that up. But I will say one thing. We're all talking in this space like prop tech is one of the newest things on earth, and I think we do the industrial sector a great disservice, because actually the most high-tech spaces that you will find anywhere in the land, if not the world, is the likes of fulfillment centers that work for the big supermarket chains and online retailers and what have you, and they have gone, they're into robotics, they've got sensors, usage, you name it. So, and what's interesting is it's cost driven there, right? Because they are working on these fractional margins. Many of these big online retailers are working on 1% margins. So if they can have a little bit of data that helps them drive a 0.5% improvement in efficiency, that has a really meaningful and meaty effect on the bottom line. Now, I think we're traveling that way into office space now.
Indeed. Well, it's been fascinating and hugely informative, Zac. So for today, thanks very much for your time. It's been wonderful, and I look forward to catching up with you again in the near future and see how things are going. But for today, thanks. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, Andrew. Thank you very much.